Well, as you no doubt realize by this time, we're going to talk about love today. It's a strange thing. Love is probably the most frequently discussed word in religion, and yet it is probably the most or the least understood. Because love has become the great cliché. Because of our long conditioning to an exterior orientation of life, it's normally thought of as love as something you find and then something you make. In other words, it's looked upon as an object instead of a spiritual faculty. And it's so important that we understand this. As I say in my book, Life is for Loving, that love is not emotion, love is not sense, love is not sex. And yet it may use any of these areas as conduits through which it expresses in the experience of transcendental love. But without the transcendental love process, we have nothing but empty vessels. Now, it might be assumed that we're going to talk about today the commitment of love, about attitudes toward people. And we are, to a large extent. This is part of the emphasis, but we're going to think a little bit about a self-commitment of love as a vital flow from within. That the commitment of love comes basically through the commitment to love. The realization that you must first of all become a channel for the infinite flow of love which comes from within. The cliché that we hear about so often is that love comes naturally when you find the right object to love or to be loved by. And that seems self-evident, and yet it's totally erroneous. The emphasis is normally upon ways of attracting or appealing to the object. A person who is lonely, a person who is hungry for love, looks around everywhere like a person going to a smorgasbord looking for food. Maybe that's the one, maybe that's the one, maybe here it is, there it is. So he's looking for love. But love isn't to be found. Love isn't something you do. Love is being. I recall a case a number of years ago, very vividly because these were both dear friends. A woman had set her heart on a particular young man. She used all the typical wiles, and I say that not in any way indicating a bias against the feminine sex, but she knew how to do it. And he didn't know what was being done. He was a typical naive man. So as they say, she chased him until he caught her. But she boasted to all of her friends he didn't have a chance. But neither did love have a chance. The marriage lasted less than 6 months. And most of that was in turmoil. Relations in and out of marriage that come about in this way are rarely successful. There may be a kind of attraction which is physical and sensual and emotional. Sometimes not even that. But there's no innate sense of union. There's no real experience of something happening between and within persons. So all that is left is what I refer to as the arrangement, where the people sometimes live out their lives out of a commitment that one must stay together till death do us part. Sometimes death is the end result. When the persons live out their lives, as Thoreau says, in quiet desperation, they may go through all the motions, even playing the role of lover and friends to the best of their ability because they think this is what they're supposed to do. But if there is no feeling of oneness, no actual experience of a transcendent relationship within, and there's little release of the kind of love that makes the relationship worthwhile. There may even be an understanding of saying loving words and doing loving things, but it is simply an attempt to be loving. But you see, love is not trying. Love is being. To try to love is not to love. I've said that for a long time, and some people don't understand that. Say, I'm going to try to love this person. I really try. I'm trying to love. We try to love our boss. We try to love our next door neighbor who makes so much noise. We try to love people. But to try to love is not to love. It's to go through emotions. You can't make yourself love by trying to love. It is becoming something. To try is to be totally barren of the kind of love that is imperative for an enduring relationship. If you have to try to love your mate, and there's something absent in which there is no real mating in the first place. Now, obviously, there are many kinds of relationships. We're going to talk briefly and casually about some of them this morning, non-judgmentally, as I promised. There are casual affairs that just come about. There are people living together for economic convenience, or for friendship, or for sex involvement. There are relations of marriage, or relations of love out of marriage, where there is a deep love commitment. And again, I make no judgment of any of these areas of experience. This is a part of our society. But my thesis today is a commitment of love. And it is my belief that every person inwardly hungers for the life fulfillment that can only come through that commitment. Some folks don't quite know what to do about it. It's like we always say about the moth that is attracted to the light. He continues banging his head against the screen. He doesn't quite know what to do when he gets there, but he keeps hitting himself against the head because within himself he has that attraction. So there's an attraction of all of us for the experience of love, but in many cases, because we don't understand ourselves, we don't quite know what to do about the whole thing. So out of a sense of loneliness, people indulge in the romantic myth that someday love will happen to me. It's going to strike me out of the blue, or across the crowded room I will see that loved person. But love has never, ever just happened to anyone. It's a total myth, a total delusion. It doesn't just happen to you. It doesn't just strike you as a bolt out of the blue. This is a total misunderstanding. This is emotion. This is sensuousness. This is sexual. This is human attraction. This is not love. Love doesn't just happen. People spend years of their lives trying to find love. And following the advice to the lovelorn, they quite often use all sorts of stratagems, from plastic surgery to frequenting vacation resorts and singles bars and everything else to try to meet the right person. But love is not to be found. It's not finding the right person. It is becoming the right person. When you become the right person, when you are centered in love, when you have this experience of interrelatedness to love, then you become the kind of attracting force that draws to you the friends and the associations in which, just as the force of gravity eventually works, there will be drawn to you the kind of person that will make the bright and beautiful and wonderful mating for you. One who hungers for love, and this covers all of us if we're honest with ourselves, should take frequent times to get centered in the realization, as the scriptures put it, behold, I have loved you with an everlasting love. That you are being loved. You are being loved from within. And your hunger for love is your hunger to acknowledge this inner love and to accept it. But because we are looking for it on the outside, we're frustrating the inner flow. And the more we look on the outside, the more we frustrate this inner flow, to the extent that we find relationships and casual acquaintanceships and sex involvements and all these things which become totally empty because we haven't allowed this love to flow forth from within ourselves. So in this way, if we can let God be love in us, to use Meister Eckhart's words rather loosely, let God be love in us, then we will progressively mature in a sense of security and love. And by the law of consciousness that is just as sure, as I say, as the law of gravity, you will be drawn toward and will attract to you one person with whom you can share a fulfilling communion of love. But it comes about not because you're out there grasping and not setting your cap on it, not trying to trap the person or somehow lure this person into a relationship, but because it happens spontaneously and naturally out of a natural evolution of the love flow from within. And it is in this sharing in the communion of love that will lead to marriage or even to an unmarried love relationship if that's the person's desire. And again, I'm not here to make any kind of judgment as to any kind of relationship, whatever the love communion that may result. But let me just, before I may be judged myself, because I'm supposed to stand for something, let me say that I believe in marriage. I believe in marriage as a very important experience of human unfoldment, because I think that the average person needs the discipline of commitment. Now, I will admit immediately in any kind of an argument that a marriage license does not necessarily verify that such a commitment is involved at all. It is only that human nature being what it is, without the license, it is easy to rationalize a self-centered approach to a relationship to be an idealistic desire to maintain spiritual freedom for each person. So the commitment is lacking often. But so we can consider the broadest possible base for our discussion. Instead of using the term marriage, which quite often I have done, and as people say, this has left me out because of my particular lifestyle, I'm simply going to refer to love relationship. But I want to make it quite clear that for myself, I'm identifying with marriage and in marriage and as marriage. Also, I'm also going to say that, again, without judgment, that I'm not referring to and not dealing with today affairs of sex without love. And again, not because I say there's anything wrong in this, because it's not for me to say it's right or wrong. Simply that this is irrelevant to our discussion of the commitment of love. We're not talking about sex without love, we're talking about love, the commitment of love. Now, we have been misled into thinking that the desire for wholeness finds fulfillment in the union of two lovers, rather than in the realization of one's whole self. So a person who is lonely will often tend, also a person who is insecure or inadequate, will often tend to have the fantasy that in marriage or in a healthy love relationship or a companionship or something, everything is going to be well, it'll all be solved. Suddenly my inadequacies go away, my feeling of loneliness is gone, everything is solved just because I suddenly come into the relationship with someone else. So the relationship quite often becomes the purgatory of all kinds of false expectations, where both partners expecting to be loved and defined and supported, at the same time abdicate responsibility for themselves. And then often, as a result, in time, when they become outwardly abusive of one another, as often happens, they accuse the other person of taking away their freedom. The other person hasn't done this at all. Simply that they have failed to give expression to the true relationship of this love force from within. And we need to understand loneliness, because loneliness is the heart and root of so much of our hunger for love. Loneliness is not simply being alone. A lot of people live alone, a lot of people are alone, and people feel perfectly secure. And there's probably more loneliness in relationships than there are loneliness and emptiness of relationships. There's nothing more lonely than two people who live in the same house, who are living under the arrangement and living their lives of quiet desperation, feeling totally empty and devoid of any true love. This is loneliness. So that loneliness essentially is a deficiency of the spirit, and it can only be corrected by overcoming the deficiency. It's not that we have not found the right friends, but that we have not found ourselves. And until we find ourselves, all the friends in the world won't overcome our loneliness. All the love relationships in the world won't overcome our loneliness. One may long for love and for a love relationship, but the basic hunger for love is the hunger for the experience of the flow of love from within ourselves. And this is the only source of love. As I say so often, even though this is startling to some persons, I can't give you love, and you can't give me love. I can provide a radiation of consciousness which creates an environment in which you find it comfortable and convenient and relaxing so that you can love yourself. So the two people who are much in love in the highest, beautiful, wonderful sense are two people who are loving each other and supporting each other in the mutuality of that beautiful self-love. And this is transcendental self-love, of course. So the love we hunger for is the love that flows forth from within ourselves and can only originate in this way. So we're lonely, if loneliness is our problem, because we are frustrating the one source of love within and hopelessly looking for love from others. And yet without the acceptance of this inner love, we're unable to accept love from others even when it is sincerely preferred. A person who does not accept himself, who does not love himself, who does not experience his inner love, is one who in a sense is unlovable. He doesn't know how to accept love. He doesn't know how to respond to it. He doesn't know how to react to it. He blames it on his mother usually, or on his family, the Freudian process. It's because you haven't had the right conditioning. But that's a cop-out. It's basically because he hasn't come to know himself and to know that the major source, the only source of love, flows forth from within. So the need is to get into the flow of love where you may easily feel love in and for yourself. And this is one of the things that we feel is central to the thesis of all of our work here on Sunday morning. This is why we talk about it as an experience of creative worthship. Because the need is to get a greater sense of worthiness. So often we say, but I'm not worthy of the love of people. But are you worthy of the love of God? Are you worthy of this divine flow of love within yourself? When you come to understand yourself, you come to experience this natural flow, because the truth is, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Quite often a person has the hang-up of guilt. Oh, if God would just forgive me, then I'd be more loving or be able to accept love. And as I say startlingly enough, and I say it all the time, God can't forgive you. God doesn't forgive, because God doesn't hold unforgiveness. If the principle is, I have loved you with an everlasting love, that means total, complete commitment. As far as the infinite is concerned, there's no lapse of love, any more than there's a lapse of gravity. Do you have to beg gravity forgive you because you fell off a curb? Oh, gravity, please, if you'll just forgive me for the rest of my life, I'll do so-and-so. Gravity doesn't forgive. There's no forgiveness in gravity. Gravity is supportive. It can be disruptive if you get out of balance, you see. So this infinite love process is always loving you with an everlasting love. So don't beg God for forgiveness. You have to forgive yourself. You have to be willing to let go, to recognize the deficiency and get yourself on a higher level so that you can experience this love flow in the way in which it is intended to come forth from within you. So this is the root of the love commitment, to feel love in and for yourself. And in this consciousness, which can only come as a result of a great deal of personal reflection and meditation, introspection, inner searching, inner acceptance, in this consciousness, you suddenly lose your fear of being alone. Suddenly you can be in a room all by yourself without anyone within miles, as it were, or at least anyone within miles in a relative sense. No one that you can communicate with, no one you can talk to, no one you can associate with, no one that you have anything in common with. Yet you can feel perfectly secure because you're in tune with the flow of love from within. And there you're loving, and you're loved, and you feel good about it. But in this consciousness, you see, you will no longer be lonely even when you're alone. And the interesting thing happens, as it happens in the fulfillment of all fundamental spiritual principles, suddenly you become attractive. Not through plastic surgery, not because some outer cosmetic thing that has happened. You become attractive because you become radiant, because this love flow radiates from within you. You become socially acceptable. You become the one that is wanted to go to parties, to do things people like to have you around, because you are expressing this inner flow of love, not because you're looking for it, but because you are it. And into the flow of happy and fulfilling relationships with many persons, suddenly comes the one person with whom you can experience a very special kind of mutual love. It's not just that I'm a hopeless romantic, maybe I am, because I believe in the need of individuals to have a relationship. But I believe in the working of divine law. As Fillmore says, love is not the plaything of human volition, but the action of divine law. Not the plaything of human volition. And this is where most of us have gone wrong. We think love is something you play with. You don't play with love any more than you play with fire or you play with gravity. It's the fulfilling of divine law. And as the Easterners say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So paraphrasing this, when you're in the consciousness of transcendent love, your mate appears. You don't have to go out seeking, looking for him. I say to try to love is not to love. Love is not trying, it is being. I say this over and over again because it's so important. So to try to find your mate, is to be out of the flow of the attracting process by which your own will come to you. As long as you're looking for your mate, you're looking in the wrong direction, and you're looking at the wrong reasons and the wrong things. You're more concerned with outer appearances. You're looking for the beautiful doll or the handsome young guy. You're looking for all the outer things which really don't count in the long run. So to try to find the mate is to be out of the flow of love. This is hard, but it's important. Your true love mate isn't lost. So stop trying to find him or her. In a sense, in a very real sense, Your true mate is not a new person to be encountered, but a new depth to be discovered in yourself. This is why, you see, truth, spiritual unfoldment is so very important in life, because it helps us to fill in all the missing pieces. Without this understanding, we make all the wrong mistakes. We do certain things, we do them for the wrong reasons. In other words, your mate is not a new person to be encountered, but a new depth in yourself to be discovered. The important commitment of love is with your own Son of God self. And as you increase this depth of commitment, you begin to draw to you spontaneously and naturally and easily and freely in a way that you could never otherwise know the supportive relationship. Quite often when this happens between people, people say, gee, it's strange, I've known this person for years and I would never even have thought of this person romantically. Yet somehow something happens. And it doesn't really just happen, it's an attracting force that comes as a result of letting God be God, letting love flow in a natural, normal way. There's so many delusions in this thing called love. For instance, we assume that two people are obviously made for each other when they fall in love. The term fall in love is the great cliche of our time. We fell in love, and we can't blame anybody, can't blame people that it didn't happen. We fell in love, and then something happened. It didn't work. So what does it mean to fall in love? Actually, if the word is correctly understood, it is more of a fall in consciousness. We fall flat on our face. We fall into ego. We fall into sensuality. We fall into sex. We fall into emotional involvements. We fall away from the deep flow of love. It's not that I say that people shouldn't fall in love, but I think we should understand that if you fall in love, there's no hope for you unless you can rise in love, unless you can recover your balance. Thomas à Kempis says, when one seeketh his own, he falls from love. In other words, a person who has fallen may often be saying, in effect, I love me and I want you for my own. Now, I've talked to a lot of people years ago when I had more time for this, a lot of people in premarital counseling, and I have been involved in participating in and performing a lot of marriage ceremonies through the years. And I've come to a great discovery that the thing that basically goes between the average individuals who are in love in their relationship to the marriage ceremony are people who are so in love with the idea of being in love, so in love with the emotion involved, so in love with the ego fulfillment of getting the ring and getting the right woman and this beautiful doll and so forth, that they lose all their perspective in terms of what love is all about. Perhaps there's no way out of this because we're all human creatures. But it's certainly important, and I always try to help people to understand this in the beginning, that unless you can rise out of this consciousness and achieve a higher level of transcendence in your relationship, there's little hope. This is probably why in America today it's said that at least 50% of everyone married will end up in divorce within a matter of a couple of years. Now that's startling, but maybe it's not at that. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's better that people end up in divorce after a year or two than to live together for 30 or 40 years in this desperation of relationship under the bondage that people should live together till death do us part. A lot of lives are totally destroyed in this way. So maybe it's better to get out of it quickly. But how much better it is to be very sure that when we get into it, we go into love through a level of transcendence, not through sense, not through emotions, not through sex involvements, though all of these are a very important part of life's experience, but through an idea of a commitment of a relationship of the flow of love from within, which uses these as channels, as a conduit through which it beautifully expresses. The interesting thing is the person who has fallen in love and experiences the kind of emotional confusion that is involved, not realizing the way to wholeness, either for oneself or in a relationship with another, we together may move along in and even try to perpetuate this unnerving state of emotional turmoil. There's nothing more frustrating, nothing more confusing than a young couple of married people trying desperately to hold on to those peculiar, fuzzy butterfly feelings they had before marriage as they get into the day-to-day experience of life, and wondering what's happened to them when it isn't there anymore. I love the comment of George Bernard Shaw, who has so many witty things to say about everything. He's talking about love. He says, when two people are under the influence of the most violent, the most insane, the most delusive, and the most transient of passions, they are required to swear that they will remain in that excited, abnormal, and exhausting condition continuously till death do them part. George Bernard Shaw. For two lonely people to fall in love. It just happens. Two lonely people sitting in a room together, they're both lonely, they both hunger for love, and they fall in love. It's natural, or unnatural, but it takes place. And then they assume that they're meant for each other because they fell in love. Now, this is not to say that this may not be a very beautiful relationship that can evolve, but there must be a rising in love. There must be a rising to a transcendent sense of spiritual union. Paraphrasing Goethe, a true relationship is not a goal in itself, but rather it is an opportunity to mature. It's a growth process, which is true of life in general, because we're people, and we're always in the midst of growth experiences, and a love relationship will always be and must be a part of that growth experience. People talk about the fact that when we were first married, he was so nice and she was so loving and so sweet, but they've changed so much as years have gone by. This is what the marriage counselor hears all the time. But they've changed. Well, of course they change, because life is growth. You know, the old cliche, stay as sweet as you are. You better not stay as sweet as you are, because you'll rot and fall apart. There must be a constant reflowering, a constant regrowth, a constant unfoldment, a constant process of development. So of course we change. But the biggest change that takes place between people is not the change in the other person, it's the change in your perspective. Because the love that you feel in the beginning is what I call prophetic insight. When you love someone, you see things in that person nobody else sees. Quite often they say, I can't understand what he sees in her, or what she sees in him. Of course you can't. Because the true consciousness of love is a perception that enables you to see beyond appearances, the kind of consciousness that a mother experiences in seeing a little child. Mama sees that little child as the best little boy in the world, even though he tramples on the neighbor's flowers. I mean, to her, he's beautiful, because she sees prophetically. She sees something that can be, sees beyond the appearance. And this is what love should do. We should see one another in the beingness of the ultimate potential. But along with that must come the commitment to help the person to outwardly manifest that which your love has seen. That's why you're called together, you see. Quite often people in a divorce court or in a marriage counseling session will say, I don't have to put up with that anymore. He does this, he does that. I don't think I have to stand for that. And I would say, startlingly enough, that's the reason you were married. You were drawn together because each of you had the ability at one time to see beyond the appearance, to see something of the greater potential in one another. And you were called to make the commitment to help that other person to become what innately he can be. So when he's not his best, or when she's not doing the kind of experiences that you think she should, then this is an opportunity for you to say, this is why we were married. This is time for me to be understanding and patient and loving, to continue to see beyond it through encouragement, through support, through praise, through blessing, to help the person to become that something which is innately the potential of all of us. And this is something that is so easily forgotten. The fundamental purpose of life is to unfold our inner splendor and to progressively come closer to the union of our human and divine self. In or out of marriage, this is what life is all about. In the marriage vow, what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder, is one thing that is almost completely misunderstood. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. What has God joined together? I would be certainly an egotist if I would assume that every time I stand before a couple, as I'm going to do later, raise my hand in benediction and say, I now pronounce you man and wife, that I've created a spiritual union. I can't create any union. I can put you in a seat, but I can't make gravity perform for you. I can simply be a participant in a process of where people are making a commitment one toward another, but something has to happen within the persons. I can't do it. The church can't do it. God can't do it. God has already done it. What God hath joined together, strangely enough, is not the magic that occurs as the clergyman lifts his hands in benediction. What God has joined together is what God has joined together in you, and what God has joined together in you. Jesus refers to it as the Father and I are one. This is what God hath joined together. And it's not a case of let no man put asunder. No man can put asunder. You can never separate yourself from this divine flow within. You can frustrate it. Like the prodigal son, you can go out into the far country and live riotously and completely block it and inhibit the flow of this natural flow of love. But God has joined us together, and this is what you really are. This is the Christ self and the human ability to express God's image likeness. So God has joined you to and in the ceaseless flow of love. And in this flow of love, you're always projecting a radiation of consciousness if you're in the flow of love, and we're not always in that consciousness. But if you're in that consciousness, you're always projecting this radiation. And in that consciousness, you tend to attract to you the person who can be a helpmate to you, or a new commitment of love in and through your present mate. It doesn't mean you always have to hop off and find another one, but you can find a new dimension of awareness of your love for this one, to renew your bond, to renew your commitment. This is why I always feel in marriage. One of the great problems is people think that you go through the portals of marriage and it's all done. Now you have to kind of make the best of it. But marriage is a matter of commitment of love. Any relationship is a commitment of love, and the commitment needs to be renewed. You have to renew the commitment every day. As a matter of fact, people understand this in other ways. You may decide that you're going to diet, or you're going to cut down on alcohol, or you're going to overcome some habit. You make a commitment to do it. You have to make that commitment every day of your life. It doesn't happen just because you say, I'm not going to smoke anymore. You have to remember time and time again, this is your commitment. And renew the commitment, and work at it, and discipline yourself toward it. So it is with marriage, or any relationship, any mutual affecting process. It's a constant renewal of the commitment. God has joined you to and in the ceaseless flow of love, and in this love you're always projecting this radiation of consciousness, or you can do so, if you continually renew yourself, continually to get yourself centered in the flow of love. It is often said that this or that love relationship failed. People say that marriage failed, or those people were having a great time together and they failed. Marriages don't fail. There's never been a failure in marriage ever. Relationships don't fail. People fail. And they fail essentially because they don't understand themselves. And because they don't understand themselves, they come into the relationship for all the wrong reasons, expecting of their mate something that can only be found in themselves. She doesn't love me anymore. Or is it a case of you have stopped loving yourself because of what you've seen in her, because of things that have happened? You have blocked the flow of love. The only love you can ever have, only love you can ever experience is that which flows forth from within yourself. It's a hard one. All metaphysics is difficult. It's hard. It's the hardest religion in the world because it puts the onus right on your own shoulders. You can't blame anyone for anything. And yet you always have the secret key to solving anything with yourself. Quite often, people in love have a tendency to focus on similarities in their interests and ways of thinking, and to avoid evidence of differences. And so the great cliche is, to justify any relationship, we have so much in common. And usually they can justify it. We enjoy our sex together. We're good friends. We love music. We go to the theater together. We do all these things. We have so much in common. It's beautiful. So it's given as proof that they're meant for one another. Usually the commonalities, in terms of the greater experience of the unfoldment of life, are very superficial and rationalistic. And normally it's an attempt to vindicate a decision that's already been arrived at in human consciousness. Of course we're together. Of course we're going to get married because we have so much in common. But the assumption is that differences disqualify people. And that's the error. Thus, two people idealize each other, impute attitudes that may not even exist, sweep under the rug any differences that are obviously there, refusing to look at them. Everybody else can see them, but they don't see them. They don't want to look at them. And of course, in time, they realize that all is not as they have believed. Disillusionment sets in. But the problem is, each person was unrealistically thinking that a good love relationship must be based on finding and being the perfect mate. I want the perfect one for me. I want a perfect lover, you see. I want a perfect mate. Well, maybe you've never heard this. If you haven't, sit back in your seats, tighten your seatbelts, because I say perfect people don't get married. Perfect people don't need a mate. If you were perfect, you would be totally, completely secure. You would be one. You would be whole. You would be absolutely, integrally a part of the divine flow within you. Your only wedding would be the wedding of the love force from within you, and you'd be completely secure and without a need of anybody. So the fact that we have a need for another, and I think most of us are just imperfect enough to have that need, is an evidence of imperfection. I'm not saying this to justify the fact that there are a lot of imperfections that are glamorized and glossed over. But the ideal love relationship is the coming together of two imperfect persons who are drawn together because each has the potential and the will and the commitment to become a blessing of growth for each other. You see? So the differences, strangely enough, the differences may be more of a reason for a good relationship than an evidence of unfitness. Now that's something to think about. You may question it, you may argue it, you may doubt it, you may reject it entirely, but think about it. The differences between people may be more of a reason for a good relationship than an evidence of unfitness. As one marriage counselor used to say, and I love this, he used to say, where there are no differences between mates, there must be a lot of indifference. And that's something to think about, isn't it? So the key is not involved in the differences and the problems with them, but it's in having a love that is transcendent enough to adjust to all differences. There's an old Spanish saying that says, you cannot love anyone unless you also love his faults. You never really love a person unless you love his faults. In other words, unless there's a totality of love, the whole person, good, bad, and indifferent. That's why the old marriage vow used to say, for good or what did it say? I haven't used that myself. In sickness and in health, in good times and bad, so forth. I don't use that stuff, so I'm not sure how it goes. But anyway. But if you love the whole person, good qualities and weaknesses, and even as you hope that you too will be loved as you are. Transcendental love is a prophetic vision that sees beyond faults. It doesn't deny them, it doesn't say they're not there, but it sees through the faults the same way as a good gardener can see beyond and through the ground when you've planted the seeds and there's nothing there but barrenness in the soil, can see through and beyond that to see the flowers ultimately flowing. It doesn't say there's no worms in the ground, there are no seeds that are unfulfilled at the moment, but it sees beyond that to see the ultimate development of that which faith sees as being true. And this is what love is. So it's not the will to set things right in other persons, not to say, I'm going to change him or else. Quite often this is what a person says, well, he has a lot of faults, but I think if I work on him enough, he'll overcome them. It's not working on the other person. It's working on yourself. It's not setting them right. It's seeing them rightly. And this has to do with what goes on in you and your consciousness. And therefore there's a consciousness that evolves that tenderly encourages change and growth without willfulness, without forcefulness, without argument, without hassles. Now the question is, how can you know if your relationship is or can be on the level of what we call the spiritual helpmate? How can you know that you fulfill that type of qualification? You know by whether you can truly let go of self and its wants and urges. And here's a test that is rather stern, and it's one that a lot of folks have never really looked at. The question is, if you have someone that you think of as your mate, your love mate, your live-in person or whatever it is, or your marriage partner, do you really enjoy this person? Or do you enjoy yourself through the instrumentality of the person? Think about that. Do you really enjoy the person, or do you enjoy yourself through the instrumentality of the person? The first is the enjoyment of love. The second is the enjoyment of lust. Now, isn't that striking, startling? It's so subtle, yet it's so important because it has to do with ego. It has to do with selfishness. It has to do with the willingness to give, to let go. True mutuality of transcendental love. Let me ask the question again. Do you really enjoy this person, or do you enjoy yourself through the instrumentality of the person? The first is the enjoyment of love, and the second is the enjoyment of lust. When persons enjoy themselves through each other, then they really do not meet as persons, only as ghosts of themselves. So their pleasure is a ghostly pleasure that cannot begin to satisfy the human soul and ultimately leads to loneliness. People warmly in the embrace of one another, who are simply enjoying themselves through the instrumentality of the other, are bound to come to a terrible climax of loneliness, emptiness. But if one is enjoying the person, really loving the person without one's own concern for self, then you're in the flow of transcendental love. It's a very subtle distinction, but it's something one needs to look at. This is why relationships in which there is no true commitment of love are often illusory. In most cases, there's no true coming together. There's no real oneness. There's no real mutuality. There's a lot of subtle selfishness, a lot of unwillingness to give fully of themselves. True love is to commit oneself freely and without reservation. If you want to love, and you then, because you are a spiritual being, you have all the love that you need to radiate within yourself. Because life within you opens out into a whole universe of love energy. You have all the love in the universe within you. The great misnomer is people say, but my great need is a lack of love. Psychologists have sort of continued this concept of saying that the greatest need in life is to be loved. And I say this is absolutely wrong unless we see it in another context. The great need is not to be loved, because we think of, I need people to love me. The great need is to love. This is why a child looks for a dog or a doll or something, because I want to love something. I want to be expressing my love energy. Maybe it's a good reason for giving dolls and dogs and animals to children, to give them this opportunity to give expression to love. We've tended to blame our parents and all sorts of persons for not giving us enough love. It could well be that in certain environments it's not conducive to expressing the love flow from within us, but it's never too late to awaken within yourself this tremendous energy flow of love, because within you, the whole universe, the whole divine focus of love, all the love that there is, as Olga said a while ago, is in focus as you, ready to flow forth through you if you can just be still and let God be God in you. It starts right where you are. It doesn't depend on somebody else. Oh, my life would be so different if my husband would just love me like he used to. Do you love yourself like you used to? Are you letting this love flow forth through you like you used to? This is probably more of what happened than the other. But obviously in a mutual commitment of this, if two folks really work at releasing this inner love flow, loving themselves more, letting this love flow from within more, then there will be a coming together in love and a beautiful environment in which this love flow can be sustained. So by your commitment in love, you become a light that sends its rays in all directions. See, when you want to practice this idea of transcendental love, it's not a case of, how can I practice love if I don't have anybody to love? You don't have to have somebody to love to practice love, except yourself. Be still and know your oneness with this divine flow of love. See yourself as a light. Jesus says, let your light shine. See yourself as a light of love that goes out in all directions. You become a radiation of love. You become a lover, not in the casual sense, but in a spiritual sense. You become a lover. You love. Love goes out in all directions. It becomes a protecting force. It's the greatest protecting force there is. People today are very insecure and fearful of going out on the streets. If you are a lover, you send out a light of love that actually wards off difficulties, but also attracts friendly relationships, mutuality of friends. And into that mutuality of friends comes always, just as the sun rises after the dawn, comes into the life of that person, that one single one with whom you can have that kind of relationship which will be mutually fulfilling and satisfying. But in a very real sense, the person who is established as a lover in a spiritual sense, loving, radiating love, because of that consciousness, he actually sends forth something into the whole world so that the world at that moment, and as long as he's in that consciousness, is a little better place to live because he's living and because he's loving. It's probably the greatest need in the world today. Not only to help resolve the conflicts between people, but to help to resolve the conflicts between nations. And it all begins when individuals recognize the need to stir up this flow of love from within themselves. Would you join me for just a moment now in a moment of silence? So that we'll go back again to our original thought of the commitment of love. As we said, it's probably clearer when we think of it as a commitment to love. But thinking for a moment not in terms of relationships, marriages, mates, friends, thinking of it basically in terms of ourself, what God hath joined together. I and the Father are one. The Christ of me and my human ability to give expression to it totally and completely. The whole universe of love and my own need for love and the willingness to let that love flow forth through me and radiate from me in all directions. This turns us then again to that lovely thought which is such a favorite of mine of Plotinus. When he talks about the fact that we come to that point where love rushes and streams and pours into us from all sides while we just sit quiet. Love flowing, flowing, flowing from within yourself, warming your heart, surging through the organs and functions of your bodies because it's a healing flow. Radiating from you as an attracting influence, it becomes a prosperity consciousness. It becomes a harmonious influence that makes for friends and relationships. And then, of course, draws to you into your life that one person, perhaps the person who's already there, gives you the consciousness in which you can become more mutually supportive. Or if you're lonely and empty of that relationship, draws to you that one person where you can have a mutuality of love that is fulfilling and enriching, satisfying, all coming from within yourself. Behold, I have loved you with an everlasting love. This is the dynamic of the God consciousness within yourself. The word that is coming out of your innate self. I have loved you with an everlasting love, an eternal love, a constant love, an ever-ceasing, unblocking flow of love that is flowing, flowing, flowing through you, supporting you, enriching you, giving you a sense of perfect wholeness. And let's all just give thanks for this. The ways in which it will unfold and the work that we have yet to do is before us individually, depending upon our commitment. But let's just together, as a benediction, let's just together in a very sincere, enthusiastic sense say, yes, yes, and so be it.